Book 3, Chapter 11 of Resurrection. The political prisoners were kept in two small rooms, the doors of which opened into a part of the passage partitioned off from the rest. The first person Nekhludoff saw on entering into this part of the passage was Simonson in his rubber jacket and with a log of pine wood in his hands, crouching in front of a stove, the door of which trembled, drawn in by the heat inside. When he saw Nekhludoff, he looked up at him from under his protruding brow, and gave him his hand without rising. "I am glad you have come. I want to speak to you," he said, looking Nekhludoff straight in the eyes, with an expression of importance. "Yes, what is it?" Nekhludoff asked. "It will do later on. I am busy just now." And Simonson turned again towards the stove, which he was heating according to a theory of his own, so as to lose as little heat energy as possible. Nekhludoff was going to enter in at the first door, when Maslova, stooping and pushing a large heap of rubbish and dust towards the stove with a handleless birch broom, came out of the other. She had a white jacket on, her skirt was tucked up, and a kerchief, drawn down to her eyebrows, protected her hair from the dust. When she saw Nekhludoff, she drew herself up, flushing and animated, put down the broom, wiped her hands on her skirt, and stopped right in front of him. "You are tidying up the apartments, I see," said Nekhludoff, shaking hands. "Yes, my old occupation," and she smiled. "But the dirt! You can't imagine what it is. We have been cleaning and cleaning. Well, is the plaid dry?" she asked, turning to Simonson. "Almost," Simonson answered, giving her a strange look which struck Nekhludoff. "All right, I'll come for it, and we'll bring the cloaks to dry. Our people are all in here," she said to Nekhludoff, pointing to the first door as she went out of the second. Nekhludoff opened the door and entered a small room, dimly lit by a little metal lamp, which was standing low down on the shelf bedstead. It was cold in the room, and there was a smell of the dust, which had not had time to settle, damp and tobacco smoke. Only those who were close to the lamp were clearly visible. The bedsteads were in the shade, and the wavering shadows glided over the walls. Two men, appointed as caterers, who had gone to fetch boiling water and provisions, were away. Most of the political prisoners were gathered together in the small room. There was Nekhludoff's old acquaintance, Vera Doukhova, with her large frightened eyes and the swollen vein on her forehead, in a grey jacket with short hair and thinner and yellower than ever. She had a newspaper spread out in front of her and sat rolling cigarettes, with a jerky movement of her hands. Emily Rintseva, whom Nekhludoff considered to be the pleasantest of the political prisoners, was also here. She looked after the housekeeping, and managed to spread a feeling of home comfort, even in the midst of the most trying surroundings. She sat beside the lamp, with her sleeves rolled up, wiping cups and mugs and placing them, with her deft, red and sunburned hands, on a cloth that was spread on the bedstead. Rintseva was a plain-looking young woman, with a clever and mild expression of face, which, when she smiled, had a way of suddenly becoming merry, animated and captivating. It was with such a smile that she now welcomed Nekhludoff. "Why, we thought you had gone back to Russia," she said. Here in a dark corner was also Mary Pavlovna, busy with a little fair-haired girl, who kept prattling in her sweet, childish accents. "How nice that you have come," she said to Nekhludoff. "Have you seen Katusha? And we have a visitor here," and she pointed to the little girl. Here was also Anatole Kryltsov, with felt boots on, sitting in a far corner with his feet under him, doubled up and shivering, his arms folded in the sleeves of his cloak, and looking at Nekhludoff with feverish eyes. Nekhludoff was going up to him, but to the right of the door a man with spectacles and reddish curls, dressed in a rubber jacket, sat talking to the pretty smiling Grabetz. This was the celebrated revolutionist Novodvorov. Nekhludoff hastened to greet him. He was in a particular hurry about it, because this man was the only one among all the political prisoners whom he disliked. Novodvorov's eyes glistened through his spectacles as he looked at Nekhludoff and held his narrow hand out to him. "Well, are you having a pleasant journey?" he asked, with apparent irony. "Yes, there is much that is interesting," Nekhludoff answered, as if he did not notice the irony, but took the question for politeness, and passed on to Kryltzoff. Though Nekhludoff appeared indifferent, he was really far from indifferent, and these words of Novodvorov, showing his evident desire to say or do something unpleasant, interfered with the state of kindness in which Nekhludoff found himself, and he felt depressed and sad. "Well, how are you?" he asked, pressing Kryltzoff's cold and trembling hand. "Pretty well, only I cannot get warm. I got wet through," Kryltzoff answered, quickly replacing his hands into the sleeves of his cloak. "And here it is also beastly cold. Look there, the window panes are broken," and he pointed to the broken panes behind the iron bars. "And how are you? Why did you not come?" "I was not allowed to. The authorities were so strict. But today the officer is lenient." "Lenient indeed," Kryltzoff remarked. "Ask Mary what she did this morning." Mary Pavlovna, from her place in the corner, related what had happened about the little girl that morning when they left the halting station. "I think it is absolutely necessary to make a collective protest," said Vera Doukhova in a determined tone, and yet looking now at one, now at another, with a frightened, undecided look. "Valdemar Simonson did protest, but that is not sufficient." "What protest?" muttered Kryltzoff, cross and frowning. Her want of simplicity, artificial tone, and nervousness had evidently been irritating him for a long time. "Are you looking for Katusha?" he asked, addressing Nekhludoff. "She is working all the time. She has cleaned this, the men's room, and now she has gone to clean the women's. Only it is not possible to clean away the fleas. And what is Mary doing there?" he asked, nodding towards the corner where Mary Pavlovna sat. "She is combing out her adopted daughter's hair," replied Rintseva. "But won't she let the insects loose on us?" asked Kryltzoff. "No, no, I am very careful. She is a clean little girl now. You take her," said Mary, turning to Rintseva, "while I go and help Katusha, and I will also bring him his plaid." Rintseva took the little girl on her lap, pressing her plump, bare little arms to her bosom with a mother's tenderness, and gave her a bit of sugar. As Mary Pavlovna left the room, two men came in with boiling water and provisions. End of Book 3, Chapter 11. Book 3, Chapter 12 of Resurrection. One of the men who came in was a short, thin young man who had a cloth-covered sheepskin coat on and high-top boots. He stepped lightly and quickly, carrying two steaming teapots, and holding a loaf wrapped in a cloth under his arm. "Well, so our prince has put in an appearance again," he said, as he placed the teapot beside the cups, and handed the bread to Rintseva. "We have bought wonderful things," he continued, as he took off his sheepskin, and flung it over the heads of the others into the corner of the bedstead. "Markel has bought milk and eggs. Why, we'll have a regular ball to-day. And Rintseva is spreading out her aesthetic cleanliness," he said, and looked with a smile at Rintseva, "and now she will make the tea." The whole presence of this man, his motion, his voice, his look, seemed to breathe vigour and merriment. The other newcomer was just the reverse of the first. He looked despondent and sad. He was short, bony, had very prominent cheekbones, a sallow complexion, thin lips, and beautiful greenish eyes, rather far apart. He wore an old wadded coat, top boots and goloshes, and was carrying 2 pots of milk and 2 round boxes made of birch bark, which he placed in front of Rintzeva. He bowed to Nekhludoff, bending only his neck, and with his eyes fixed on him. Then, having reluctantly given him his damp hand to shake, he began to take out the provisions. Both these political prisoners were of the people. The first was Nabatoff, a peasant; the second Markel Kondratiev, a factory hand. Markel did not come among the revolutionists till he was quite a man, Nabatoff only 18. After leaving the village school, owing to his exceptional talents, Nabatoff entered the gymnasium, and maintained himself by giving lessons all the time he studied there, and obtained the gold medal. He did not go to the university because, while still in the 7th class of the gymnasium, he made up his mind to go among the people and enlighten his neglected brethren. This he did, first getting the place of a government clerk in a large village. He was soon arrested because he read to the peasants, and arranged a cooperative industrial association among them. They kept him imprisoned for 8 months, and then set him free, but he remained under police supervision. As soon as he was liberated, he went to another village, got a place as schoolmaster, and did the same as he had done in the first village. He was again taken up and kept 14 months in prison, where his convictions became yet stronger. After that he was exiled to the Perm government, from where he escaped. Then he was put in prison for 7 months, and after that exiled to Archangel. There he refused to take the oath of allegiance that was required of them, and was condemned to be exiled to the Takutsk government, so that half his life, since he reached manhood, was passed in prison and exile. All these adventures did not embitter him nor weaken his energy, but rather stimulated it. He was a lively young fellow, with a splendid digestion, always active, gay, and vigorous. He never repented of anything, never looked far ahead, and used all his powers, his cleverness, his practical knowledge, to act in the present. When free, he worked towards the aim he had set himself, the enlightening and the uniting of the working men, especially the country labourers. When in prison, he was just as energetic and practical in finding means to come in contact with the outer world, and in arranging his own life and the life of his group as comfortably as the conditions would allow. Above all things, he was a communist. He wanted, as it seemed to him, nothing for himself, and contented himself with very little, but demanded very much for the group of his comrades, and could work for it either physically or mentally, day and night, without sleep or food. As a peasant he had been industrious, observant, clever at his work, and naturally self-controlled, polite without any effort, and attentive not only to the wishes, but also the opinions of others. His widowed mother, an illiterate, superstitious, old peasant woman, was still living, and Nabatoff helped her and went to see her while he was free. During the time he spent at home, he entered into all the interest of his mother's life, helped her in her work, and continued his intercourse with former playfellows. Smoked cheap tobacco with them in so-called dog's feet, a kind of cigarette that the peasants smoke, made of a bit of paper and bent at one end into a hook. Took part in their fist-fights, and explained to them how they were all being deceived by the state, and how they ought to disentangle themselves out of the deception they were kept in. When he thought or spoke of what a revolution would do for the people, he always imagined this people from whom he had sprung himself, left in very nearly the same conditions as they were in, only with sufficient land, and without the gentry and without officials. the revolution according to him, and in this he differed from Novodvorov and Novodvorov's follower Markel Kondratiev, should not alter the elementary forms of the life of the people, should not break down the whole edifice, but should only alter the inner walls of the beautiful, strong, enormous old structure he loved so dearly. He was also a typical peasant in his views on religion, never thinking about metaphysical questions, about the origin of all origin, or the future life. God was to him, as also to Arago, an hypothesis, which he had had no need of up to now. He had no business with the origin of the world, whether Moses or Darwin was right. Darwinism, which seemed so important to his fellows, was only the same kind of plaything of the mind as the creation in 6 days. The question how the world had originated did not interest him, just because the question how it would be best to live in this world was ever before him. He never thought about future life, always bearing in the depth of his soul the firm and quiet conviction inherited from his forefathers and common to all labourers on the land, that just as in the world of plants and animals nothing ceases to exist, but continually changes its form, the manure into grain, the grain into a food, the tadpole into a frog, the caterpillar into a butterfly, the acorn into an oak, so man also does not perish, but only undergoes a change. He believed in this, and therefore always looked death straight in the face, and bravely bore the sufferings that lead towards it, but did not care and did not know how to speak about it. He loved work, was always employed in some practical business, and put his comrades in the way of the same kind of practical work. The other political prisoner from among the people, Markel Kondratiev, was a very different kind of man. He began to work at the age of 15, and took to smoking and drinking in order to stifle a dense sense of being wronged. He first realized he was wronged one Christmas when they, the factory children, were invited to a Christmas tree, got up by the employer's wife, where he received a farthing whistle, an apple, a gilt walnut and a fig, while the employer's children had presents given them which seemed gifts from fairyland, and had cost more than 50 roubles, as he afterwards heard. When he was 20, a celebrated revolutionist came to their factory to work as a working girl, and noticing his superior qualities, began giving books and pamphlets to Kondratiev, and to talk and explain his position to him, and how to remedy it. When the possibility of freeing himself and others from their oppressed state rose clearly in his mind, the injustice of this state appeared more cruel and more terrible than before, and he longed passionately not only for freedom, but also for the punishment of those who had arranged and who kept up this cruel injustice. Kondratiev devoted himself with passion to the acquirement of knowledge. It was not clear to him how knowledge should bring about the realization of the social ideal, but he believed that the knowledge that had shown him the injustice of the state in which he lived would also abolish that injustice itself. Besides, knowledge would, in his opinion, raise him above others. Therefore he left off drinking and smoking, and devoted all his leisure time to study. The revolutionist gave him lessons, and his thirst for every kind of knowledge, and the facility with which he took it in, surprised her. In 2 years he had mastered algebra, geometry, history, which he was specially fond of, and made acquaintance with artistic and critical, and especially socialistic literature. The revolutionist was arrested, and Kondratiev with her, forbidden books having been found in their possession, and they were imprisoned and then exiled to the Vologda government. There Kondratiev became acquainted with Novodvorov, and read a great deal more revolutionary literature, remembered it all, and became still firmer in his socialistic views. While in exile, he became leader in a large strike, which ended in the destruction of a factory and the murder of the director. He was again arrested and condemned to Siberia. His religious views were of the same negative nature as his views of the existing economic conditions. Having seen the absurdity of the religion in which he was brought up, and having gained with great effort, and at first with fear, but later with rapture, freedom from it, he did not tire of viciously and with venom ridiculing priests and religious dogmas, as if wishing to revenge himself for the deception that had been practised on him. He was ascetic through habit, contented himself with very little, and like all those used to work from childhood, and whose muscles have been developed, he could work much and easily, and was quick at any manual labour. But what he valued most was the leisure in prisons and halting stations, which enabled him to continue his studies. He was now studying the first volume of Karl Marx, and carefully hid the book in his sack as if it were a great treasure. He behaved with reserve and indifference to all his comrades except Novodvorov, to whom he was greatly attached, and whose arguments on all subjects he accepted as unanswerable truths. He had an indefinite contempt for women, whom he looked upon as a hindrance in all necessary business. But he pitied Maslova and was gentle with her, for he considered her an example of the way the lower are exploited by the upper classes. The same reason made him dislike Nekhludoff, so that he talked little with him, and never pressed Nekhludoff's hand, but only held out his own, to be pressed when greeting him. End of Book 3, Chapter 12.